Hello everyone, my name is Angela Ephros from HG Plus. Welcome to our webinar and welcome Morrie, who is here as our guest. Morrie, would you like to make a quick introduction?
Yes, I'm retired from the U.S. government. I was in charge of a multitude of programs at the U.S. Immigration Service. So I was an official of the U.S. Immigration Agency for over 30 years. And one of the key areas I was responsible for was for F1, M1, and J1 students. So the other thing I was responsible for was for the EB-5 Immigrant Investor Program.
Awesome, and we're so lucky to have you. So let's just get right in. The first thing I was thinking we could talk about today is that we all have heard and we're aware that, President Trump's administration is under a lot of pressure to make changes to the H-1B visa. And from what I've been reading, it seems like some of those changes might actually be a benefit to the immigrant workers. And is that something that you would agree with? And could you explain some of what those changes are and how it's not necessarily a bad thing?
Yes, many U.S. companies rely on tens of thousands of H-1B workers. Those are individuals who obtain the H-1B visa, and the initial visa is good for 3 years, and then it can be extended for 2 more years, where they can work for a U.S. company in a range of skilled jobs that require a college degree and a level of complexity. The thing that's happening is in the United States, the position of Congress and the government, and now under President Trump's administration, is a sense that the H-1B visa apparently is, they consider it being abused, that companies are using H-1B to bring in foreign workers to displace American workers at a lower wage. And so there's a great push to change that and make it more difficult. What this means is, I understand that the students who are interested, who are in optional practical training, maybe post-completion optional practical training, would say, well, is that bad for me because I'm a foreign worker? If I get a job as a student, I'm a foreign worker. But no, because the target is to try to tighten up and create greater balance and discipline with H-1B. But what that means is, if I'm an American employer and I've been using H-1B extensively, or right now I have a desire to hire some people as H-1B workers, and now I can't reach them, I can't access them, but I have needs, I have positions, and if I can't find, somebody that meets my needs, I will be absolutely receptive to employing a student on OPT who can meet my needs and do the job for me. So I think that in a way it's an unintended benefit to students who are in OPT status.
Absolutely. And also from my understanding, in some situations, because the international employee is a little bit dependent on the company for their visa, it limits their freedom as far as changing jobs, because they won't get a salary increase. The international employees don't really have that arguing ability. Is that correct?
No, they don't. And, what they call the prevailing wage, essentially the greatest use of H-1B is for programmers, software programmers.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they want to change is say, you know what, a programmer is not what we consider a high-skilled technical area that is intended for H-1B. We're talking about software engineers, mathematicians, hardware engineers, people that actually look to the conceptual level of developing the system, not the people that do the specific work within the system like programming. I'm not putting down programming and coding, but code writers write code as the specifications dictate. What you want to get to is who creates the specifications at the level of the engineer, at the level of the designer. And so that's where they want to move towards H-1Bs. But what I'm looking at is there are tens of thousands of F1 academic students coming out of not only at the bachelor's level, but at master's level, who have the skill set and the ability to step into these kind of jobs, even to do programming. Think of all the students that do programming in the course, code writing and stuff, in the course of their studies. So, and then there are students who could teach. You could even have a student on OPT teach in a school if they're studying to be a teacher, if they're studying to be an engineer, if they're studying to be a chemist, if they're studying to be a biologist, if they're studying to be an artist of a certain type, like a graphic design artist. You know, H-1B work applies to graphic design as well, as it does to, you know, even the president's wife, Melania, came in as an H model, you know, for her first time. So there's a range of jobs and skill sets that would relate to the kind of education and skills that F1 students have, who are now on OPT status, which grants them the right to immediately work. They don't have to worry about, you know, like for instance, H-1B has what they call a quota. There's only so many numbers that could be happening. There is no quota for F1. So, you know, there's no quota for OPT, there's no quota for F1. So the reality is if a student with OPT can match to a company that needs those skills, then there's a great opportunity for that to result in work. And the student has the freedom to move from one company to another without restriction.
Sure. And it seems that, like you mentioned, there's a lot of jobs right now that can't be filled. Like there's not enough tech students that are local American students, and the universities don't have enough graduates to keep up with the demand for jobs right now. So like you said, OPT is a good way to help solve that problem. But after OPT, what's going to happen next? Do you think that the lack of people to fill these jobs is going to result in more H-1B opportunity in the future?
Well, you know, that's difficult because H-1B, there's a lot of political things influencing it.
Sure.
But companies, U.S. employers will need workers to support the economy of the U.S. and to support the requirements and the demand for their services, their products, and their operations. And so I believe that H-1B will remain. And I believe that H-1B will be more refined and worked on to what, I'll tell you where I believe Congress and where the American people want to go. The reality is that 80% of H-1B is being used by Indian technicians to come to the US, and they're flooding the job markets. And what they want to do is move away from that and get to more sophisticated, educated, and trained and skilled people, which are the very people that are doing F1 students that are studying in universities in the United States, in colleges in the United States, in research programs in the United States, as opposed to hordes of technicians coming who were educated in India and are now coming to do lower level technical jobs in companies in the United States. That's not what the aim of the F1 program is and what OPT is, because that is a higher education aimed at providing the foundation for that student to operate at a level of technical sophistication for which H-1B is intended.
So as the students are getting ready, right now we have students that are going to be graduating pretty soon. What should they be keeping in mind to get ready for OPT?
Well, I think that they should be having somebody who is very gifted and qualified to look at resumes and helping them structure their resumes, and then where they seek and post their resumes and where they obtain jobs. Like for instance, you know, temp agencies, I would recommend doing research relative to your area of OPT focus, looking at temp agencies in the United States. There are scores of temp agencies that match a skill level of an individual to a company that can immediately obtain that individual through the temp agency. And oftentimes when a company has somebody coming through the temp agency, and I mean there are temp agencies that provide software developers, they provide code writers, they provide engineer assistants, they provide design assistants, they provide teaching assistants. There's a whole range, even manufacturing, people working with sophisticated equipment in auto manufacturing. So the concept of temp agencies in the United States has evolved. There, at one time, temps meant clerical workers, secretaries, cashiers.
Mm-hmm.
Now in the U.S., temp means the full range of skills and qualities, from registered nurse to physicians to engineers to software designers. There are specialty temp agencies that provide those skill sets and those people for jobs through those agencies. So I would, one, recommend to any student listening who's moving into OPT, do your research and find the temp agencies that solicit and market skill sets such as yourself in your area of focus. Number two is looking at volunteer opportunities, because I know it's nice to earn a living and make money, but getting a job as an internship or an intern or a volunteer in your area of study, say from what's a non-government organization, such as Oxfam or Doctors Without Borders or UNICEF. There's all kinds of agencies that could truly utilize on a volunteer basis, but it's considered authorized work, students with the skill set to do that, that enables you to meet others and to what we call network, and maybe find somebody who could then utilize and hire you in a job that works. The other thing I would say that that is important is something like Craigslist. I don't know if everyone here is familiar with Craigslist, but I know a lot of companies hire people off of Craigslist. So you have to look at innovatively where you can get your information and your skills out. And so I'd say between temp agencies, between the normal process of where you post your resume and things like Craigslist, and word of mouth and people you know, and getting together with people and talking to your designated school officer, your foreign student advisor, to continue to assist you with contacts and networking.
Okay, we have another great question from Tony. For Chinese EB-5 investors, during the long wait before they can be authorized to work, what other types of visa might they be able to use in order to stay in the U.S. during that waiting period?
Well, that's always a challenge, but if you are an OPT, obviously you can stay as long as you work to meet the requirements to sustain your status in OPT, especially if you're a STEM student. Because remember, you don't have to necessarily work in a paying job. You could also work in a voluntary job that is related to your area of study. But also, you would then, if everything didn't work, probably the best route for you, if you were looking to stay in the U.S., would be to look to moving to another academic program that might supplement what you're doing, which would enable you to continue as an F1 student, where you can take a lower, you don't necessarily, you could take the 12 credits or so, because there are how can I say, provisions in the F1 regulations that allow a designated school official to authorize lower than a full-time load. But the reality is, to stay here, you might have to continue in school. Or if you get the H-1B, or if somebody wants to sponsor you for the H-1B, you could and you achieve it, you could do it that way as well. But
Since,
the other thing you could do is look to work for an international organization. If you could get on with an international organization, say somebody that is related to your area of study, there is the G visa, which you could then obtain, which would have no restrictions, that would enable you to continue in the United States.
we have another question from, well, actually several questions from Hyatt, and the first one is, what should the students do if they cannot succeed in the H-1B lottery? And then how about the grace period for OPT students? And when will they get the results for the lottery?
Well, the lottery results, I think that USCIS has stated that they would be providing the lottery's results by the end of this month for cases that will be processed starting October 1st for fiscal year 2018. Typically, the lottery results should be, published within 4 to 6 weeks by the agency once they run the numbers and the names. The other thing, what was the other part of her question? Do you remember?
What should the students do if they cannot succeed in the H-1B lottery?
Right. And she asked about the grace period.
Sure.
The grace period, once you finish your post-completion OPT, you do have a 60-day grace period by which you can tour and visit friends and do things, but you cannot work anymore, but you at least can remain in the US for up to an additional 2 months before you have to leave. But in terms of what you can do, if you're still in F1 status before you hit your grace period, then the question is finding a position that would work for you and that you could talk to and come to agreement on, that your designated school official can certify to CIS that you're in proper post-completion OPT work.
Sure.
And if you're coming to the end of your OPT and you no longer can work, and you don't have a pending H-1B or some other angle that would enable you to stay longer, then, as I said earlier, if you really wanted to stay, you could even look to the opportunity as a J-1 exchange researcher or student, or continue as an F1 student. But also, if you're in an area that you can do research, and remember, postgraduate work enables you to do research where you could do research in anthropology, in psychology, in science, in engineering, and chemistry. There's a lot of things like that, but basically it's going to have to be tied to your continuing education as a legitimate F1. Or the option is looking for an opportunity as a J1 exchange person.
Okay. And then, of course, they can always go back to school.
Well, that's where I was saying F1 or exchange is something.
And then someone asked again, so that's related to your major, which you had said earlier, yes, it's related to your major, but for OPT, how it's related would be decided by the DSO.
Correct. Okay. There's no red line, there's no hard red line as to what is or is not related. That is, they defer to the DSO being familiar with you, your school, your program of study, and the boundaries for OPT to work with you to determine that, because your DSO has to certify that you're in legitimate post-completion OPT along those lines.
Sure. Okay, so another question is, I heard that once you get H-1B, you will technically be stuck in that company and that specific position. What if you find a better job or a better pay? Can you jump into that job?
Well, the H-1B is based on the fact that you're sponsored by the company that hired you. Then what you have to do is the new company would have to file for you to sponsor you for them. And while your sponsorship by that company is pending, then I believe that you could work for the company during the period of pendency because you're outside the lottery system. And then it's a question of you just qualifying for that other H-1B job. The question is finding a company that wants to hire you and also sponsor you through the H-1B process. But
So,
you cannot leave your company without a valid pending I-129 petition by the new company to sponsor you.
so if you're going to be switching jobs, that means you don't have to go through the lottery system again?
No, you're
Okay.
once you've won an H-1B out of the lottery system, you're no longer subject to the limitation through the lottery.
Okay. Okay. Another question. OPT, is it once per person or once per degree?
It's per program, not per person. So if you do, you could come in and do a 2-year associate's degree and do your OPT. Then you can continue into you can complete your associate degree, do your OPT, and then you can complete your bachelor's degree and do your OPT. But typically you would complete your bachelor's degree, you could do your OPT, then when you start your master's program and complete that, you get a full amount of OPT. And the same with post-PhD.
What is the DSO?
DSO, in the regulations, DSO means Designated School Official. That is the foreign student office that handles your I-20. When you look at your I-20 and see who signs it, that is signed by your designated school official in the foreign student office. Like, depending, in a small school, you might only have one or two maybe DSOs, but in a large university, like if you look at the University of Pennsylvania, or if you look at New York University or University of Miami or Duke University, you could have 15 DSOs in that office. So the question is which foreign student advisor you work with. Your foreign student advisor is the DSO, should be.
Morrie, can you explain the grace period really quickly?
The reality is, this, all the grace period is like, for instance, when you're an F1, if you don't go into post-completion OPT, say you don't apply for it or whatever, you still have 60 days of grace in which you can either apply for post-completion OPT, or you can visit and travel, or you can apply to another school to do a new program or a different academic study, or to transfer to another school. So that's what the grace period allows you. It says basically your status ends when your program ends, but the rules will say, but we're going to allow you to stay in status for an additional 60 days. So if you have OPT and say your OPT ends on, like today, April 14th, 2017, you still have 60 days where you can't work anymore, but you're legally in the United States for an additional 60 days. And in those 60 days, you can decide to go to school again, to another school, or a lot of choices. But at the end of that, if you don't make any of those options to continue as a legal non-immigrant in the United States, then you would have to depart. But you are given that 60-day buffer.
And Morrie, is there anything you'd like to say before we close out?
Just, I always enjoy meeting the young people, and I will respond. And you are the future, and don't give up. I have to tell you, when I was young and I looked for my first job, I put out over 100 resumes.
Wow.
And I mean, in those days, there was no internet. I had to go door to door.
Yeah.
So what I'm letting you know is it's really hard to get the first job. That's why you can't give up. That's why you have to have your hope, and you've got to have the energy. You got to get up every day with a plan. I'm going to go here. I'm going to look on the internet here. I'm going to knock on these many doors. I'm going to talk to this many people. I'm going to go over to these 3 companies and go to their personnel offices. I'm going to go back and talk to my foreign student advisor. Maybe new things have come in since I was there 2 weeks ago. Don't give up. Be aggressive and go for it, because that's the best way to go. So that is my advice, is like, maintain your energy and your commitment to yourself to move forward.
Thank you everyone for being here. Like I said, keep your eyes out for the next invite. Thank you, Morrie, for offering your time. We really, really appreciate it. And we'll see everybody next time. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye.